Hey everyone, it's Scott Monker, and welcome to another one of my reviews. I'm slowly trying to improve the quality of the reviews. We'll see how it goes. Today we're going to take a look at Guildhall Fantasy. There we go, Fantasy Coalition. It's actually the third in the Guildhall set by AEG. Let's first start by talking about the game. So Guildhall Fantasy is by AEG. Here's the manual here, right here. And it is essentially a set collection game at its core. It's a set collection game with a little bit of the take-that mechanics built in. What we are is we're all trying to build guilds inside a medieval fantasy setting with different types of guilds like paladins and barbarians and all sorts of different types of fantasy characters. When we complete sets, we turn them in, get victory points, which also give us additional temporary powers. And it's kind of interesting because when you're building a guild, as you play action cards, which we'll talk about in a little bit, your powers increase, and the minute you turn in that guild, those powers go away, and you're having to rebuild again. So it's kind of nice because it's got a kind of a built-in mechanic to prevent overrun. So yeah, it's a set collection game. You're collecting colors of cards based upon class, so it's a card game. Really, the way it works is that on your turn you have a hand of cards. You take a card out. You have 2 actions per turn. You can either 1, play a card out of your hand as an action. 2, you can take a a set of completed Guildhall, turn it in for victory points, and get a couple powers as a result. Or 3, you can discard and get new cards in your hand. You get 2 actions per turn, and then it becomes the other player's turn. So that's the basic mechanics. They are very solid. They do have that way. First of all, no one gets eliminated. We know that that's kind of modern trends. No one dies in game anymore. That's fine. We like that because that way people don't get bored. It does have several mechanics in place to prevent runaway. In terms of power in particular, I was a little worried when I first saw it that you would suddenly get these really powerful characters and these not so powerful characters, players. And actually the way it works is that anytime you start to get victory points, your actual power starts to go down in terms of your ability to do things. So it's kind of an interesting mechanic in the way it works. So really good, rock-solid mechanics in a set collection, take that kind of game. So those are the mechanics. So let's go ahead and talk about the art. In general, I think the art here in this particular game is really good. Here's an example. All you've got are cards. There's nothing other than cards. This is what a card looks like. This is the Artificer. There it is. You'll see here you got very nice cards up in the upper corner. You have some icons that relate to combining stuff together. I didn't read that very closely because I don't have the other sets. And you have some iconography here at the bottom. So the art is really solid. Now there's only one complaint I have about the way the art is constructed on these cards. And I'm going to take an example here right here. This is the Barbarian card. I'm going to show you the Barbarian card. Now, the Barbarian picture up there, that's very good art. I really like that. But the problem is the art bleeds down into the bottom of the card. And the bottom of the card is the iconography which describes what actions you can take when you play this card. And the problem is the way they've designed it, the iconography and the art bleed together. And on a dark card like this, you can see it's pretty hard to read and understand what that means. Now for other cards, here's the Artificer. It's kind of less problematic, but I'll tell you, it's still kind of hard to read. So I ended up using the reference cards to figure out, well, what can I do with this card when I play it, rather than using the iconography on the card, which is kind of disappointing. So the art's really nice. I really like the art. It's really pretty. It's got good descriptions on it. You can see there. Here's a really cool Barbarian. I like the art. The problem is the art is bleeding onto the card, and if you don't know what the card does, and the thing is, each card, you'll see here, it has an example here, depending upon how many cards you've got in a guild, it's got 1 or 3, sometimes it can be 1 through 5, it can be a lot. You can see here's 0, 2, and 4 right there. You can have a lot of different abilities, and it's kind of hard to tell. So other than that, art is rock solid. Here's the very manual. It's very pretty. We'll talk about the manual in a little bit. So that's the art. Now let's go ahead and talk about the manual and how it works. Here's the manual for Guildhall. It's a relatively short instruction book, rulebook manual. You can tell I work in the tech industry. It's 15 pages long, and honestly, It looks like about the last five pages are pretty pointless. Well, not pointless, but they're used for special situations when you're running multiple guild sets, and there's a credits page. So not worthless, but not something most people are going to read on a regular basis. So you're really talking about a 10-page rule book, which is pretty good. Now, in terms of the rule book itself, they've got a couple big pluses here. First of all, on the very first page, components list. Critical, you must have a components list. Game designers, listen to me. The first thing I do when I do an unboxing is I look for a components list so I can make sure that everything is there. Not that it's your fault that not everything's there, but I do occasionally find, oh, look, I'm missing one of these or I'm missing one of these, and I need to know what I might be missing. Back we have essentially what constitutes a very basic player reference card. It explains all the iconography. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, why I think that's a problem. But we do have a basic iconography here. So those are the rules. The rules are rulebook is pretty straightforward. The only thing that I found was that sometimes it's certainly not the worst I've seen, but it was a little disjointed. To give you an example of it, is you get 3 actions per turn. You can play a card, discard, or buy VP. Now, you'll notice you have play card, discard, and buy VP. It never explained how to fill back your hand. And so I had to ask around, and I realized that discard, one of the actions, was actually discard and draw. I would have renamed it discard and draw, and the discard action is quite a ways in until you realize it. Now, another example of kind of a little bit of disjointedness is you have, on the right-hand side, you have your guild set, and on the left-hand side, you have your action, so you play a card to your action. And I read through the rules for the first time, and I said, okay, I play a card in the action, and I get to take the action, but how do I get that card over to the Guildhall? Is there some secret action I don't know about? So on and so forth. Well, what it turns out is, here's play one card, tells you about playing one card, and that's on page 4. Now, it tells you about playing the card and how playing the card works and all that kind of stuff. But then we go to page 8, right here, and there's end of turn. And what it turns out is at the end of the turn, I take the card that I played in the action card and move it to the end. Now, I realize it's an end of turn action. What I would have done is under play the card rule, under the play the card explanation, I would have said, at the end of your turn, you're going to move this over to your Guildhall and see end of turn for an explanation. Because I was kind of hunting around saying, I'll be honest and say, end of turn, I tend to sometimes skim over a little bit more than I should. So I thought it was a little confusing. Other than that, it has good instructions. I do think it kind of presumes that you've played a previous edition of Guildhall. I haven't. Might be why I had some of my questions. So that's it. Now, let's talk about one of the problems I do have with the kind of the general rule book, which is I tell people we're in a modern era of iconography in games. Because we're multinational now and games are going to all sorts of different ones, we know that we have to move towards iconography for cards and stuff. And it's good. But the problem is when we move to this iconography, player aids become critical. Because we simply can't, particularly this one, look at this, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There's 15 different icons in this game that can appear on cards. I can't remember what all of them are. I'm not that smart. And so I think player aids are critical. Now, the back of the manual has one, but they could have tried to figure out a way to put in a card which had these on it. That was the first thing. So they didn't have this player aid. We were passing this around from person to person throughout the game. Second one is we already talked about the fact that these cards, the iconography was hard to read. They do have a solution for that, which is they have these little cards here, which explain each of the classes and their powers. See, if you look over here, here's a little power sheet right over here, right there, a little power sheet. So they did have these, but they only had one for each class. Honestly, given it's a 4-player game, I think it's a 4-player game, I would have done 4 of each of these and handed them out. So I would have had 4 of these and then a player aid and said, look, that's an additional, 20, 4 times 5 is 20, 6, 24, maybe an additional 30 cards. Yeah, that's quite a bit, and it's quite a bit, but honestly, I think it would have significantly made the game easier to understand, because we found basically what we ended up doing was we put these in a stack, and as we played the game, we passed them around, because you really had to reference these to figure out what was going on. So that's kind of the manual. So the manual, mostly solid, some minor stuff that was a problem, player aids, a good start, not sufficient in my opinion, given the level of iconography. Let's go ahead now and talk about the theme. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little about the theme of this game. I'm a big theme person. I really like really well themed games. This game I would put in terms of a kind of a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of how well does the theme integrate with the game. It's a 3 or a 4. It's not horrible. I've seen some really horrible pasted on theme games, where basically the theme really didn't make any difference at all, and the theme didn't really add anything to the game. Now I do think the theme does add something to the cards. It's kind of cool. The artwork's kind of cool. They kind of try to make the powers relate somewhat to the class involved. They're not really good at it, but they do an effort at it. It's still a little pasted on. So don't think that this is going to be this deep. I did a review of Archer Love Letter, and I said the same thing. It's definitely pasted on. Love the game anyway, still pasted on theme, because the powers didn't at all relate to the characters at all, and the only reason the theme was there to provide cool jokes to tell during the games, because it's a big social interaction game. This is a step above that, but it's also not as kind of, say, themely set as, say, something like In the Name of Odin, which I also reviewed recently, where I think the theme is really tightly integrated into the game. So I do think that there's definitely kind of a little pasting onto the theme here. That's okay. It's still a good, solid game. It's still a lot of fun. Just be aware that if you're expecting the play to involve something like Guilds of London, I think I haven't played it yet, but I look at Guilds of London, which is not about fantasy guilds, it's about the London guilds, still much more tightly integrated. Crazy Carts, kind of another game I'm about to review here in a while. Also, the theme's much more tightly integrated here. Feels a little artificial, but it's still a good game, so that's kind of the theme. So let's talk about, now that we know the mechanics and the art and the theme and all that kind of stuff, which is all very important, let's just talk about playing the game. It is definitely a solid set collection game. I think in terms of, if you were to compare it with something, Sushi Go is another set collection game, which also has card drafting, which obviously this game doesn't. But it's a solid set collection game. I would put it kind of, in terms of complexity, one step ahead of Sushi Go. Or one step higher. Sushi Go is very straightforward. This one's a little more complicated. Though actually, now that, honestly, when I think about it, maybe not, because here you're always trying to collect sets of 5 colors of the same one. In Sushi Go, you have kind of a more complicated, I want 3 of these and 10 of these, and, well, not quite that. You understand what I mean if you played Sushi Go. So, in some respects, the play to get the sets is more difficult in this game. Sushi Go, you have more variety in terms of the sets, and maybe, not that I like this game, but maybe a little variety in the set collection might be a little bit better. Might make the game a little bit better. It's still very good. So, playing the game, it plays very good for 2 to 3. I think it plays best at 2. Someone else mentioned that as well. It plays pretty well at 2 and 3. I think at 4 it gets a little bit cumbersome. You spend a lot particularly with people who haven't played before. It takes a while for them to figure out how to play the cards right, and the action still can take a little bit. But in general, good solid set collection mechanics. Now, this does have a fairly significant take that mechanic set to it, and I was kind of surprised because I hadn't realized that when I boxed it and read the rules until I started looking at the powers that some of the guilds have when you play the action cards have when you're building guilds. Some of them have some fairly significant take that powers. Like there's one power where you play the action card and you get to take one uncompleted guild from one other player, take all of their cards out of that one particular guild and put those cards into your hand. That's a pretty significant, because a person could be one card short of completing a guild, and you could grab all their cards and put them in your hand, and now it's going to take you 2 turns or 3 turns to get that guild back up into your Guildhall, but still, you're significant interference with their play style. Depending upon the game, I'm typically not a big take that kind of player. Now, there are some exceptions. I'm a huge Smash Up fan, and that's almost exclusively take that kind of style mechanics. There's a lot of that in that game. So, be aware if you're someone that does not like take that style of mechanics where you're interfering with other players in their operations directly. Not through, oh, I did this and you can't now because of worker placement, for example, but, oh, I'm doing something which is going to cause you to lose points or going to cause you to lose cards or whatever directly. Definitely there's some pieces of this game that have that to it. It's certainly not the motivating field. There are games where take that as a motivating influence. Red Dragon Inn. clearly a game where Take That is all it's about. Every card you play is about, with a few exceptions, is about interfering with other players and causing them damage. This is not that extreme, but it's still pretty extreme in the scheme of things. So be aware. It's a Take That set collection game. Other than that, I really like the game. It's a lot of fun. It's short. It's easy to play once you learn the rules. So playing it is a lot of fun. It's a good social light game. I would put it one step above an intro game. Intro games like Sushi Go, New Salem, where you can, even if the person's never played kind of one of the modern era, I kind of have a problem with the concept of the phrase modern era, but I can kind of understand where we talk about. We're beyond the age of mass media games like Monopoly and Parcheesi and Sorry. I love those games, but they're old era. We've got the new era, which are games like Pandemic, Sushi Go, New Salem, Viticulture. Now, Viticulture is fairly advanced. It's a Euro game, but it's definitely a new, kind of more towards a new era game rather than an older era game. So other than that, really good, fun to play game. So what did I think about this game? This is definitely, I would put it in my set of games where it's not quite a pickup game, but it's not quite that heavy, deep, really kind of mind-bending, brain-burning type of game. It sits kind of somewhere in between. I like it, but I have a hard time figuring out. I tend to, when I play game nights, I start out with a quick light game like New Salem, Sushi Go, something that you can play in 15 or 20 minutes. Good Cop, Get Bad Cop, another example of a light, fluffy game you play at the beginning, kind of warm people up. And then I tend to jump right into something like Viticulture, In the Name of Odin. Yesterday we played Union Station. We played Castles of Mad King Ludwig, Suburbia, Quadropolis, something like that. How this fits in that game, for me personally, I'm not sure. I think it's a great game. I'm just thinking in terms of the way my game nights tend to run, how it would fit. Now, I would say that where it did fit for us is that it was an end-of-night game, which was kind of interesting, which is, so you started the day with something light and fluffy like Sushi Go, got people kind of going into it. Archer Love Letter, or any version of the Love Letters, take your choice. You play a couple rounds of it, you get people warmed up, you jump into something really brain-burning like a In the Name of Odin, Viticulture, maybe even something, this is less brain-burny but still kind of interesting, something like a Stockpile. Or something maybe not brain-burny but kind of longer like a Zombicide. Certainly Zombicide is not a brain-burner by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a lot of fun. So Zombicide. And then you get done and you say, oh, well, we've only got about 20 or 30 minutes to go. We don't have enough time to do another round of Zombicide. We don't want to play Sushi Go or something light. What do we have in between? And this is where Guildhall comes in. I think I'd say it's an end-of-night game. The rules are slightly more complicated than an opening game, but not so complicated and so long that you're spending hours explaining people how to play. So that's kind of where it would fit for me. It would be an end-of-night game rather than a beginning-of-the-day game. I'd also... The box, here's the box, almost a little bit too big. Now, that's because it might be because I don't have any of the other ones. So if I look here, you see here, half the box is empty. Now, the thing is, I expect when the expansions come out and so on and so forth, I may fill this out. Is this what I would call a pickup game box? Now, if I were to cut this box in half, then the answer would be, yeah, I'd probably call it a pickup game. I could probably put it a little bit bigger. It's 120 cards, plus or minus a few. A little bit bigger than a deck of cards, about 2 decks of cards, so I'd label it as a pickup game. So I think the box is a little bit, in terms of making it a pickup game, a little bit problematic, unless I'm carrying one of, say, I have a Broken Token big game box or game bag thing. I might just pitch the box, put it in a couple decks of cards and do it that way. That might be something to consider, make it a pickup game. Because it definitely feels to me, particularly if I had friends who had played it, I can see this if I had friends that I played this regularly, it could become a pickup game for us. It may just be right now I've only played it maybe a half a dozen or so times, that it still doesn't quite feel pickup gamey for me. And if I had a group of friends where we played it on a regular basis, which we may, with time that may come to pass, then it would be definitely pick up game level material. So, all in all, I really enjoyed the game. I think it's a lot of fun. The theme a little bit pasted on. There's some mechanics issues, not mechanics issues, but player aid and manual issues, which I talked about. Other than that, definitely I would put it on my approval of go out and buy.